I'm Aryeh Schwartz, along with my co-host Rachel Galligan, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. The playoffs are so close we can taste it. We're talking 5 or 4 games for every team in the league. A few teams have already punched their tickets to the playoffs, while the other teams are fighting tooth and nail to get those last spots. So let's discuss. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community. Patreon.com/Winsidr. That's patreon.com/Winsidr. It's for less than a cup of coffee a month. You can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W and make what we do possible. And while you're online, make sure you check out all of our written content over at winsidr.com. That's winsidr.com. If you're looking for a fun new way to enjoy the W, join us on Playback for our W watch parties. The link is playback.tv/Winsidr. That's playback.tv/Winsidr. And something that Rachel and I have been doing for a few years now is the Winsidr Film Room. You can check it out on YouTube. We bring players on the show. We watch film with them of their game, and they explain to us why they did what they did. I think it's unique and one of the coolest things in the W right now. But welcome back to the Winsidr Show. I'm excited to be back in the booth with the great Hall of Famer, Rachel Galligan. Let me start off before I let Rachel get into it and saying that Rachel made a valiant comeback. She's now down just 1 in Pick'em against me. And for everyone who sent me a message, our sound editing team, our loyal listening fans, there is a smoke detector alarm going off in the background occasionally. Nobody is dying. No, nothing bad is happening. I just happen to live in a place that the management company doesn't want to help me fix the smoke detectors. So I apologize to all of our listeners.
Oh, God.
Yeah, my apologies.
That's great.
But don't worry. Everyone's good. Everyone's safe. Rachel, thoughts on the state of the W?
Man, I mean, thoughts. It's not even 2 weeks left, right? It's more like
September 10th. So we got 11 days left?
Yeah, I mean, it's a week and a half, which just seems wild. I feel like it was 3 weeks, like yesterday. So, obviously a lot has gone on. At this point, there's 1,000 different scenarios, right? You get to this scenario portion of the season where you kind of just start playing things out in your head. I mean, we know Las Vegas, New York, Connecticut have clinched the playoff spot. The Seattle Storm and Phoenix Mercury are out. The Indiana Fever, God love them, are barely hanging on by a thread. I think I saw somewhere ESPN Analytics gave them a 0.1% chance of actually making the playoffs. So there's that bit of information. Shout out to ESPN Analytics. But yeah, I mean, I think right now that's that 4 through 10 spot. And then, I think there's some teams in there that are really interesting to analyze. I mean, I obviously want to talk at some point about New York and how well they're playing, winning 4 games in a row, fresh off another win over the Las Vegas Aces. The Aces have lost 2 in a row. I went back and was like, when was the last time Las Vegas lost 2 in a row? Well, they did last season. So it wasn't as exciting as I thought that was going to be. But yeah, New York playing obviously exceptionally very well, just 1.5 games back from that first, that number 1 seed.
And they have the tiebreaker.
Yeah, and they have the tiebreaker, which is huge. I mean, that truly could come down. Now, I will say, Vegas has a favorable schedule rest of the way if you want to go through kind of the end of that. But I think, it's a matter of getting through Friday and Sunday and then getting an opportunity. I was listening to Becky Hammond. She said, I'm going to give them as many days as they want. They want 2, they want 4. That's what we're going to get. We need to get healthy. You can tell the fatigue is at play. You can tell the depth is an issue. Obviously, this point of the season, yes, I understand everybody is having long road trips. Everyone's having long road swings. But just talking specifically about Las Vegas and just where they're at this point of the season at the end of August, you can definitely tell what the number one seed has been battling. So going to be really interesting to see how they finish up. And obviously New York hitting their stride. I mean, it takes a while for teams to figure it out. And this is, in my opinion, the most exciting team in the WNBA right now. It'll be fun to see some of the power rankings that come out. I would be shocked if New York's not in that top spot for a lot of people's. But I want to focus more so on, that 4 through 10. I think Dallas Wings, is that next team just vying to kind of secure their spot. From my understanding, if they win on Friday over the Indiana Fever, they will secure a playoff spot. Or if the Chicago Sky lose. The Sky had a huge win the other night.
We're going to talk about that? We're going to talk about that last play?
Man. Can we talk about the fact that Nneka Ogwumike had 20 shot attempts and 0 free throw attempts?
They don't respect the defending MVP. It's funny because I think that like in the W world, we often have a recency bias.
For sure.
Where like people forget that Nneka's putting up stats better than her MVP season. She is an MVP, right? And while we sit here, we go, this player who's recently had success doesn't get MVP calls, or this player doesn't, like, or the flip side, like we talk about Diana Taurasi just finding ways to like throw her body. I saw like a interview with her at the halftime of a game last night. It wasn't like a live interview or anything, but she was talking about how as she's gotten older, she's had to adapt her game. And like, if you didn't chuckle and think to yourself, by adapt your game, you mean just like throw your body into the defender so you get a couple free throws. And like, look, I respect it because she's doing what she can to help her team win, and it's according to the rules. And if the refs are going to call it, the refs are going to call it. But a player like Nneka Ogwumike, who like maybe doesn't have the accolades of a Diana Taurasi, fine, but like, would I put her on the same pedestal of like getting MVP calls? Heck yes. I'm not giving Diana Taurasi, you know what I mean? Like Nneka makes her living in the paint, and to not get free throws, I think it's been an issue this whole season, I would argue.
For sure. Let's talk about that final play, that aggressive, powerful drive to the rim by Kalia Copper. What are your thoughts on that?
So here's my thing, and I think I texted you this earlier in the morning. I watched the play. My initial reaction is that's a push-off. Like, there's no question that should have been called. Now, I will caveat that with it. I did not watch the full game. I haven't had a chance to watch the full. Like, I saw highlights, looked at the box scores, looked at, a few key things, watched some clips of it. I have not watched it in its entirety. If the game was being called like that, like allowing the physicality, allowing, that type of stuff, I completely get it. And on the flip side, I also get like, if you're sitting there and you're Chicago or you're a fan, nobody wants to be watching one of the biggest stars in the game make a cut to the basket to take the lead as time is expiring with 22 seconds left, and you call a foul on that. I could see fans be like, you know what I mean? Like, I see it both ways, where if they call it, it's, they're calling ticky-tack fouls. Why are they doing that when the game's on the line? Refs shouldn't decide it. But on the other hand, it's like, I mean, that looked like a shove to me. And you got to call the call when the call is there. I'm curious for you, Rachel, as someone who's coached, played, and is so close to the game. Like, where do you kind of fall on the let them play versus make a call in those waning moments of a tight game?
Man, it's hard. I mean, that's a hard situation. I can see arguments for both ways. I think you hit the nail on the head about it comes down to how has the game been officiated for the entirety of the game, and trying to remain consistent. You can't just all of a sudden, if they're allowing them to play physical, and other things have been able to, they've been able to get away with things throughout the course of the game. And then in the final moments, you want to make it ticky-tack and you want to make a call that was not being called 20 minutes ago. That's where I have an issue with it. I think the consistency across the board is where, I have to lean on in terms of, okay, how is this being called? I can watch that. I'm looking at this play right now as we're having a conversation, and I can see an argument for both ways. There definitely is a shoulder dip. There definitely is arguing a flop. I could see an argument for both ways. I have to almost stay neutral on it because I love the aggressive, strong take by Copper. I think it was, back to the point about, Nneka not getting to the free throw line. Was this a game that was relatively physical through the stretch and they're letting them kind of play through some things? Now, I watched about 2.5 quarters of it. I wasn't able to watch the beginning of the game. But for the most part, it felt like that was pretty on par with how the rest of the game was being played. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't watch the whole thing. I'm doing a bunch of wedding stuff. Everybody knows I'm getting married here very, very soon. Shout out. That's exciting.
Finals opening night, Rachel.
In your opinion, from watching the game, was it consistent for how the rest of the game had been played?
Yeah, I mean, from what I saw, again, I didn't watch it in its entirety from start to finish. I would say yes. Just from what I saw, I think there's signs pointing to yes. Now, my thing is, if it's an egregious call, then I think you can kind of change it. I don't know. I go back and forth. Rachel, if you haven't figured this out already, I just argue with myself in my head. And then whoever wins that argument gets 5 minutes of me speaking it. And then the other side takes over.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, at that point in the game, LA was on a 12-2 run. They had done a great job of executing out of their timeouts and had some really solid looks. Carly was knocking down threes and playing exceptionally well. Even on that last possession, they had 3, pretty solid looks at the basket, So, for me, I look at this call and I look at this specific situation, but, there's no gap help on the backside. Once she got past Jordan Canada,
splitting of the sea,
it was essentially a straight line drive to the basket, and Nneka is able to come over and kind of contest at the last second. But there wasn't any gap help. There wasn't any, in terms of the types of defense you'd want to see in that scenario. So, I mean, it was a straight line drive to the basket. And then I would say, okay, the next possession down, I mean, LA got 3 solid looks. If one of those go in, I thought when Carly got the offensive rebound and she was able to put it back up, I thought that was going. I was the way the end of the game had been going, I thought LA was going to run away with it on that kind of offensive rebound. But it didn't go. But if that shot goes, we're not even having this conversation anymore.
Well, not having conversation, then we got to talk about this. Offensive rebounds, 14-8 in LA's favor. Okay. Steals, 10-7, LA's favor. Right. All right. Blocks. We'll ignore that one. Turnovers, 14-9, LA's favor. Fouls, personal fouls, 15-15. So it was a fairly even game. The thing that's truly, truly standing out, even heck, 3-pointers, right? 9 out of 22 for Chicago, 7 of 23 for LA. And they, in both teams, 12 free throws versus 13. So I don't think it was a lopsided in how it was officiated. The thing that stands out to me is Chicago shot 46% from the field, whereas LA shot 36%. That's the big gap. And the big gap for me is that you're talking about the difference of making one shot. LA made one less shot, 29 shots to 30 shots. The difference was LA took 14 more shots. They just weren't able to find the bottom of the basket. And I think, we can talk about that last play, getting opportunities. We can talk about other things. Chicago is the type of team that attacks the paint. When Kahleah Copper is your best player, there's going to be a lot of movement, a lot of action, a lot of, game in the paint. That's just what Ka does. She gets downhill, she plays in transition, but she just Swiss cheeses you, cuts you up, puts holes in you, in the paint. And so I think, honestly, this game makes me want to look back at Chicago Sky games throughout the season and kind of how they've been officiated, in the sense of, I just think that when you have players that Chicago has, players who sometimes aggressively, maybe also attack the paint. When you have those players, I think you can have referees do one of two things: either call everything or call, on the other end, less than they should. And it seems like this was probably a game of calling less than they should, even if it was even.
And again, the reason we are spending so much time talking about this matchup, we're talking about the arguably the race for that final spot.
Well, let's talk about this real quick. So right now, as of today, okay, WNBA standings. You said this before. Seattle and Phoenix out 10-25 and 9-26, right? Indiana, essentially, they're not out, but like you said, they have a
Right. I
0.0111% chance, right? They're 11-24. They essentially have the same record as those two other teams. Then you have that skip up to the number 9 spot. And I think, this is really, really interesting. Dallas beats Minnesota last night. Sorry, Washington beats Minnesota last night to go 17-18, bump up throughout all the tiebreakers and everything, right? We have 3 teams, the 5th seed, the 6th seed, and the 7th seed, all with 17 wins.
Mhm.
It goes Washington at 5, Atlanta at 6, Minnesota at 7. So the interesting part, and then that game that we just talked about, LA 15-20 at 8th spot, and then Chicago 15-21 in the 9th spot. So like those teams right there, right? It's a 2-game separation between Washington and LA and Chicago. So we can easily see a lot of movement between. I look at Dallas differently. Like Dallas is going to lose some stupid games, lose 2 in a row to Minnesota without Satu, fine. Like, but I feel like they're pretty much a lock. It's 5 through 9 for me. Like I already consider Dallas as a playoff team. I already consider Indiana as out.
I agree. Yeah.
So long-windedly, it's really interesting because you have these teams fighting for that last spot. And now we've been saying this all season. You look at Washington, Atlanta, Minnesota, LA, and Chicago. The only team that literally has every reason to win and no reason to lose is Chicago. And I'm excited for like what the end of the season looks like for them.
And the win on Tuesday, they now have the tiebreaker over LA, which is huge. I mean, LA still has a shot, but right now that's why that specific game and that specific ending and the way it all played out is so important and why we've spent so much time on it. Because again, it's like that final number 8 spot in the playoffs is likely going to be, one of those 2 teams. And in Chicago, that win was so big, not just because they're not eliminated, but because they win the tiebreaker over LA and being so close neck and neck with them.
Can I drop a little interesting aspect for you? So I'm looking at, if nobody's looked at this, look at tankathon.com. It's super fun. But they have a little tab where you can look at the remaining schedule strength. Shout out to them because for a very long time, WNBA, people had to spend hours doing the math on them on their own.
Through it. Take us through.
Yeah, right. So I'm looking at Chicago. Chicago has 4 games left. They play New York and Connecticut once each. New York has 5 games left and similarly New York plays. Why am I looking at New York? Sorry.
I was going to say, why are we talking about New York right now?
LA and Chicago both play Connecticut and New York once each. Okay. So even break there, they're both taking on 2 top teams in this league. Then Chicago moves on to their last 2 games. Fever, right? A lottery team, and Minnesota, a team that's a bubble playoff team. And yes, I'm saying that. LA Sparks play Seattle twice and the Mystics once. So while like I kind of prefer, I don't know, like what would you prefer, Rachel? Play Fever once, Minnesota once, or
4 games left? Am I listening to you correctly?
Chicago has 4. LA has 5. So LA's playing 1 extra game. They play Seattle twice and the Mystics once.
Okay.
Whereas Chicago is just Fever and Minnesota once each. I mean, essentially, like, here's my thing. Seattle, in my mind, whether or not they're winning more games, yeah, I don't know. No, maybe Seattle's not better than the Fever. Whatever. Mystics are not on the same level as the Fever or Chicago or Minnesota or whatever. Like, just hands down, I think you, me, and Matt were texting about this last night during the game. Like, the difference between the Mystics and some of these other teams is like, hands down, you look at this roster, player is better than their opponents. And it's whether or not they produce and they play well. That's the real kind of deciding factor.
Well, and they have Elena Deladon. I mean,
yes.
Like, we all know this. We're not saying this to anybody who doesn't know. When Elena Deladon is on the floor, it changes the entire dynamic of the game. And she can carry the Mystics, to be successful in this final stretch. So it's like, I think was it you that was talking about a couple weeks ago, like
Mm-hmm.
Washington's in actually a pretty solid position, assuming they can get healthy.
Yeah.
And I think we're starting to see the tides have turned now. Elena's back on the floor. They've won a couple games. I would hate to be one of those top seeds and have to face them in the first round. I mean,
Oh God, that would be
which is what's
horrible.
going to end up, probably transpiring for the most part. But like, dang, that's brutal. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, in terms of like, okay, which schedule would you rather have? I guess we could go round and round about that. But LA with 5 opportunities, Chicago with 2. It really comes down to me. That tiebreaker. That tiebreaker is all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I have to think I want Chicago, even though technically I don't understand how this is possible. According to this, that like Chicago has a tougher record, I guess, because of where Minnesota was ranked and Seattle being ranked below. But like that Washington game is going to be key, and then playing 2 games at the end of the season against Seattle. Yes, they have nothing to play for. Which, by the way, I just want everyone to note in that game that Seattle lost. I think was it against Chicago?
Yeah.
Seattle's down 5 with like enough time to make a play for it, right? And Jewel's standing in a corner, jumping up and down, waving her hands. Jordan Horston clearly following direction of the coach, dribbles ball out. This is such a tangent, such a side piece. Do you think, and I don't even know, Rachel, if you even saw it, but like Jewel's just standing in the corner flailing and was pissed. It looked like, obviously on TV, haven't spoken to her. She looked pissed. Walking off the court for that one. Do you think that could become a defining moment for Jewel Lloyd's Seattle career, or in the sense of like, could that be a moment that she goes, they're not doing this the way I want it to be done, and possibly lighting a spark that ignites a flame, or do we think that that's just like, those moments happen? Like it's a whole season. We knew this was coming.
I probably personally lean towards the latter. But man, you really took a hard left on that.
No, because I just think, I'm not saying in the sense of I think it is that, but I think, I always like to be aware. Granted, my wife says I'm very oblivious to my surroundings. I always like to be aware of my surroundings in the sense of like when something happens, thinking to the future, thinking back to that moment, like, will that be a defining moment? And I think, sometimes we have that, right? With Skylar Diggins-Smith and Diana Taurasi just getting to, a friendly dispute on the sidelines during the game, and Tina Charles just sitting there like, why am I here? And then sometimes you don't have it, maybe with this Jewel Lloyd thing. But I just think it's something that like, I don't want to forget that moment, because if Jewel leaves, somebody's got to ask her, like, was that a moment?
I would say for me, it was probably more of a holistic encompassing of this entire season. And the weight that was on Lloyd's back, and the everything that she had to do night in and night out to try and carry this team for the 10 wins they have so far this season. Now, okay, you're out. A lot of times a team like that, when they have nothing to lose, they're just playing games and trying to, I guess, have fun and finish out the season as a professional. Like, that's the part about Seattle that's nerve-wracking. You have Jewel Lloyd, who could put up, 45 points a night. And that's an issue, obviously. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's more of a holistic encompassing of just the entire season and the level of frustration and how far this franchise has fallen from the top to where they're at now is wild to think about. Obviously we knew it was coming. We knew it was happening. The future is going to be extremely interesting, but I'm bringing that back to talk about just them in the playoffs. I don't know that I would be overly thrilled to face a Seattle team and a frustrated Jewel Lloyd who can go off at any moment.
Especially, LA Sparks are going to need. But here's the thing. Like, if I'm being blunt, LA's done enough with all the injuries and Lexi Brown being out for so long and, so much turnover in the new regime and all this and that. Like, if I'm LA, I'm thanking the refs. If I'm LA, I'm going, okay, we're half a game above Chicago to be out of the playoffs and into the lottery. Let's do that. Because if I'm being honest, Atlanta doesn't need to get in the lottery. They have the solid pieces, like the cornerstones. They just need to add some other pieces and have those cornerstones grow a little bit. I'm not worried about LA or Atlanta. Minnesota, they should want to get out of the play. They don't want to be in the playoffs. I'm not saying they don't want to. I'm saying like if I'm in charge, they don't want to because Minnesota is a subpar team. People can hype it up. Oh, they started 0-6 and now they're 17-19. Whoop-de freaking do. I'm sorry. It's like
go off.
because like here's my thing. Like Washington wants to move forward in the playoffs. They have this team. Will they stay together after this year? Who knows? Make that push. 5th seed, honestly, might even hurt them more, right? They might even want to be in a lower seed so they can take on one of these top dogs when they're their most healthy. I know some people disagree with me on that. Minnesota should want to move out and figure out how they can, because here's the thing that nobody really, really, really wants to talk about is because it's accumulated over 2 years of the lottery, like it's the first year that's the hardest, in my opinion, to tank. And maybe tanking is not the right word, but like, you know what I mean? Because
find yourself
once you've
position, because we're all competitors, right? Everyone's competitors. They want to win games. Coaches want to win games.
Exactly.
But from a big picture perspective, which franchises benefits the most from being in the lottery this year? Again, like we're looking at years down the line, not just, okay, let's inch into the playoffs and let's get beat in the first round.
Exactly. Because like Rachel, if you're the GM or the president of basketball operations or whatever, and I tell you, hey, you can make the playoffs for the next 3 years, lose in the first round every time, or you can be in the lottery for 2 years and make it to the second round of the playoffs in year 3 or 4.
I actually think it's more beneficial for Chicago to be in the lottery because
they don't get the pick.
Oh, that's true. I'm sorry. That's what I mean. I meant LA. It's more beneficial for LA to be in the lottery.
Yes.
If Chicago, I mean, they traded all of those assets away. It's completely irrelevant for LA and the long-term success. And let's just even say for next year, even if LA is in the lottery this year, and they're able to secure that pick. That's awesome, exciting for them. Great. That's a huge asset and piece that they can build around. We've all talked about. We will continue as we transition into the college basketball season to talk about this upcoming year's draft. But LA, that's a huge piece. I don't see this team, I don't see this team being in the lottery next year. Not with a Kurt Miller coach team and the moves that they're going to be able to make this free agency. You've got players like Jewel Lloyd. You've got question marks and other players like Skylar Diggins-Smith. I mean, they're going to have a great free agency, in my opinion. This team is going to get healthy, in my opinion. This team, the LA Sparks that we're talking about right now versus 1 year from now is going to be completely different. I don't see them being in the lottery 2 years in a row.
I completely agree. Now, I will also say that, like, when I talk about, I want to be very clear because I see this a lot and I like to, split hairs. LA's had a lot of injuries this year. I don't think, for the most part,
for sure,
they impacted the final outcome of their season. If I'm being 100% blunt, like Lexi Brown, fine, I'll give you that. But like Steph Talbot, who's been a usable role player at best, and a Carly or Katie Lou, like who hasn't, actually had WNBA success yet. So like in my mind, like LA loves to say, the LA media and LA fans, oh, we had so many injuries, but yeah, Jazz Thomas was hurt too. All this stuff. Like LA created a narrative, and that's what teams do, right? You create the narrative to form a family, things like that. And I completely agree with you. They're not going to be back in the lottery because they're going to have a much better roster next year. There's going to be so much turnaround.
Exactly. And this season for LA was about riding the ship, camaraderie-wise, culture-wise, getting stability back into the franchise from the front office to the coach to the players. Stabilizing LA again and making that a solid building piece for the future. And you've been able to do that with really solid professionals. There's been from what we can tell, no drama this season. There's been no absolute chaos. And I think that they've been able to achieve that. That is the win. And that is what this year needed to be for LA. To me, whether they're in the playoffs or not, honestly, I think it's more beneficial for them to be in the lottery. I'll continue to say it for the long-term success of this franchise.
I completely agree. And also, I'll say this, long-term success of Minnesota. I think it's better for them to be in the lottery too. Now, granted, they would be fighting with LA for that last lottery spot. But I just think that, like, sorry to go back to Minnesota. I just had to finish this rant. I said this at the beginning of the year, and I will make this comment. At the beginning of the year, I said, I think this Minnesota roster is a lottery team. And a lot of people said I was crazy. From my perspective, they have been the biggest surprise of the season, in the sense of they have been able to hold their own against some of the right. They beat a Connecticut, and then they beat New York without Nafisa Collier. I think what we have seen, though, is we got back into the Minnesota Lynx, like, reality set in, right? The offseason, we can talk about these things, predictions, blah, blah, blah. It's like, at the end of the day, the Minnesota Lynx decided to follow a path of essentially doing a similar thing that they've done over the past few years that hasn't worked. I know a lot of people will point to getting swept by the Seattle Storm in the semifinals and being like 5 seconds away from winning the first game of that series as like a point of, oh, they can succeed. I would argue differently, that it was a bubble season that was missing how many superstars, and they were able to provide, a fill to a hole. Like, some team needs to win. Some team needs to be in that seed. But I think Minnesota surprised me in the sense of they've held their own at times, but at the end of the day, they are who we thought they were.
But I also think that they have really solid pieces on this.
Yes.
You've got arguably a next tier MVP caliber player.
Yes.
You've got great rookies who've really stepped up and played exceptionally well. You've got Kayla McBride, who has had a really great season. Even Jessica Shepard, who missed a large portion of the season, is a really good player, a solid piece to any team in this league. So, like, I don't even look at Minnesota and LA on like the same playing field in terms of like the talent that's actively on the court. I think Minnesota is a tier above. They've got better players than I think maybe we gave them credit for at the earlier part of the season.
No. Because sorry, Rachel. Here's the thing. Minnesota has 6 players that I would keep on roster. Maybe 7. You got Fee, Kayla McBride, Jessica Shepard, Milic, obviously, Diamond Miller, and Dorka. Those are the 6, in my mind, the only 6 on this roster I would keep. Okay, now, they're going to be lucky that next year, Natalie Chanwa, unrestricted free agent, that 155, gone. Aryeh Powers, that 201, gone. Lindsey Allen, gone. Rachel Banham, gone. Like, all those players should be gone. Tiffany Mitchell, you kind of locked yourself into that at 139. I'm curious to see kind of what that does, because while she's been, like, here's my thing. Minnesota has a lot of really good role players, and then they have Fee, who is a superstar MVP caliber player.
Sure.
At the end of the day, we're going to need to see Diamond Miller and Dorka grow. That's what it comes down to. And then you have a 3-headed monster if they hit their potential. Honestly, I'm more impressed this season by Dorka than I was from Diamond Miller, if I'm being real. And I think that, like, they have a good team. They need 1 to 2 more big name players. Sure. They need, somebody who's going, like, Jessica Shepard is a great 6th woman, arguably 6th woman of the year, because she has that skill set. She could be a starter, but maybe she benefits them more coming off the bench now that you have Dorka. They have players like that, right? And then they have Fee. They have players that you can plug them in onto a really good team, and then you have Fee. But you need 1 or 2 more good leaders.
And regardless if they are in the playoffs or not, this is a team who, of course, you could make that argument. Yeah, like you said, it is more beneficial. They're going to have the cap space and the flexibility and the freedom that they didn't quite have last free agency period to make moves. This free agency, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, for Minnesota is going to be of the ages. This is extremely important moving forward. Oh, yeah. And they're going to have the opportunity to do that with the cap space and the moves that they'll be able to make. So I don't know. We're getting on. Today is the day of tangents, guys. We apologize.
I was traveling last week. We didn't get to chat and just like vent it all out. I apologize to our sound editor because there's a lot more beeps in the background than there should have been. The last topic I want to touch on, because look, let's be real. We're going to have some guests coming on soon for the show. Some playoff superstars, some playoff up and comers, things like that. But something that was, so we're going to have a lot more episodes coming. That's what I was trying to say. But as the playoffs come, there was a funny, fun, eye-rolling, head palm moment earlier today. Some news came out that Commissioner Kathy Engelbert had sent a message to all the teams, essentially saying that, like, well, yes, I said full playoffs will be chartered, or whatever the exact terminology was. Let me pull that up, just so I don't have anyone going.
Yeah,
That's not what
reporting by the next, I believe, by the way.
full playoffs.
Yeah.
She had said full playoffs will be chartered. Reporting from the next and Howard Magdal, basically, essentially, the memo comes out, and the memo says you get one charter flight to the games. Meaning, if Rachel and I, or if Dallas is playing in round 1 against LA, and they win in 2 games, and then they have a week off until their next game, they can either charter back home and then fly commercial to the game, or they can charter directly to the new city they're going to, or they can fly commercial home and then charter to the game. So essentially, being as the way the schedule is made, because we play in a league that has series, it's very possible that during the playoffs, some of these teams will not be fully flying commercial. And I know we chatted about this earlier. I mean, part of me just kind of chuckles. I think I said this earlier because if I'm being 100% honest, yes, obviously the main headline is like Kathy Engelbert deceives WNBA media, fans, whatever. But like, also part of me just can't help but be like, why did we fall for it? Like, why did we, when she said full playoffs, as opposed to saying every flight during the playoffs will be chartered? Why didn't somebody go, Kathy, are you saying every flight will be chartered, or are you saying something else?
Right.
And I think that's kind of it, where people, all of us included, myself included, we jump to the, this is happening now. Cool. Let's run with it. We're excited, as opposed to, and I think maybe that might be a good analogy for WNBA expansion, where I don't think we should rush to it. You know what I mean? Like, take our time, make sure it's good.
Yeah, it comes down to fine print. I'll be honest, when that news came out earlier this season about charter flights in the playoffs, I personally just kind of like, I was like, oh, that's great. That's a great step. But at the same time, I thought to myself, I'm going to wait until we get to the season and we see the logistics of how this actually plays out. Like, to me, I was actually very shocked that they could pull that off. And I was obviously reading the headlines and the graphics and, that just said, private, charter flights for playoffs, like, without reading the fine print. I thought to myself, I'm going to visit this at the end of the season and really think about this. And like, there has to be more to the story here. I guess I didn't expect it all to be fully chartered for every logistical portion of each of these single trips. A team gets eliminated and they get to fly charter home, or what I'm like. Now we're seeing the fine print. Now we're seeing how it actually looks. Now we're seeing how, okay, yeah, it might make sense to charter certain portions of this, but then other times when there's not a time crunch and your season could be over, like, flying commercial makes sense. I see all sides of that, and I guess in my mind, I knew there was going to be more fine print than what was coming out in that exact moment. But
and also, like,
understand the frustration, that is for sure, because it definitely came across from all of us, from all the reporting and everything at that time, that it was going to be charter flights for all of playoffs.
Well, and I'll also add that, like, in case we're talking about the topic of it, because I think it's very clear we all want charter flights for the whole league, for every game, obviously we want it to be financially viable and all those things. But like, we're not sitting here going like, oh, we're happy they didn't get like, we're discussing the tale of announcement, taking it back, people run, like, that aspect of it.
There's a pattern here. You could even say the same thing with expansion. That hasn't played out the way we had originally believed, or we had thought that it would. It's like,
well, that's just because they're going to Denver, Rachel.
Well, knock on wood. Let's that.
Rachel's like, shut. Rachel, for those who don't know, Rachel's told me explicitly not to bring that up because she doesn't want me to jinx it.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's going to happen. It's fine. I do believe that, but it's just a matter of when at this point in Denver. That's what
no, I agree.
will they
I think,
will they
yeah.
be in the first grouping of it? Will they be in the second grouping? I don't know, but I do feel very confident that one of the 4 expansion teams will be in Denver. But however, yeah, I'm just saying there's been a pattern here of announcements and walking it back and asterisks and things like that in the history of this league, and the things that we get excited about, and then it's like, oh, hold on, here's the fine print. I'm not surprised about it, to be honest.
Want to let everyone know September 11th or September 12th, Rachel and I will be doing a special live, that's right, live recording of the Winsidr show over on Playback. So I hope everyone can join us. We'll get some more details out on that. September 13th is when playoffs start. September 10th is the last regular season game. So not only will we have our normal episodes and stuff like that in that window and throughout the playoffs and everything, but just wanted to drop a line and let everyone know. Check your calendars, check social media, listen to the podcast. We'll have 1 to 2, maybe even 3 episodes by then, and we'll definitely plug it again. But the first ever live recording of the Winsidr show will be happening over on playback.tv/Winsidr. All right, Rachel, we got one last thing to do. You know it. I know it, because I'm currently winning by 1. It's Pick'em. As we head into the last games, tomorrow, as we record this, or on the 31st, we have 3 games. Let's do the next 6 games, Rachel, and let's pick our winners. So first, we got the Mercury and the Sun. Who are you going with? Mercury at Sun.
Phoenix just literally looked like they had zero interest in being on the court the other night. It's hard for me to good God. It's Connecticut. Of course I'm going Connecticut.
Yeah, I mean, me too. And we're also close enough now that I'm no longer going to let you get the picks you want. Mystics at Aces.
Aces.
Interesting. I definitely want to go Aces. I'll go Mystics though. You know what? If I think that they're going to be, a whatever a playoff upset team, then I better go with them, right?
Yep.
Storm at Sparks.
Man, that's a tough one. That's a big game. I mean, every game now for LA and Chicago is important to have your eyes out for that, for sure. I'm going to go LA. They're going to win that one.
Yeah, I kind of also, I think Jules just going to be pissed. You know what I mean? She just pissed off her game, whatever. Wings at Fever. We're going Wings, right?
Yep.
Dream at Lynx.
Ooh, man. That's a good one. Ooh, that's a
side note. Minnesota Lynx are raising their season ticket prices 31% for next year.
Wow.
It's a lot of money for a team that...
I wonder how that fan base is feeling about that.
Oh, they're pissed. Oh, they're real pissed. My stepdad's mad. All the Facebook groups, the fan page, they are real mad. Especially, I think, side tangent, I think part of it's also because the benefits that season ticket holders get, they used to have a lot of private events and do fun things and give away free stuff to them. They no longer do any of that. I think they do 1 event or 2 events a year. Fans are pissed. All right, Dream at Lynx.
Oh, I'm going to go Minnesota.
Okay, perfect. We got a split. Rachel going MN, me going ATL. Okay. And the last of our 6, Sun at Liberty.
Ooh, I think New York is on a next level right now. I see this stretch continuing on. I'm going to go Liberty.
I agree also. But I'll be nice.
I mean, that's not an easy one. That's not an easy one.
It's not an easy one. And the only reason I think it is look, New York is 9-1 in their last 10 games. New York is the hottest team in the league. I put them as the number 1 team in the last power rankings. I'll probably put them again as number 1. There's just, I don't know. I see one more hiccup. And it's either in this game or it's against the Wings. But I just see one more hiccup in this. So I'm going to go with the Sun. Not that I think it matters that much almost. But I don't know. Alyssa Thomas, quadruple double night, maybe.
I'm just thankful that we have some parity in that, and I'm just going to take the lead, so it's fine.
I'm just oh please. I'm just happy that we have a freaking Alyssa Thomas and we get to watch her play.
Yeah, of course.
Oh man. All right. Well, one last thing before we log off. Rachel, remind me again. I forgot. Who's your GOAT?
Who is my GOAT? I don't know. No comment.
All right. We'll catch you next time.